Can a ghost commit murder? In the 1870s, a 6-year-old girl named Fanchon Moncaire was a darling of the transatlantic ocean liner scene, but behind her porcelain doll, an innocent smile, lay a 43-year-old criminal mastermind with a deadly grudge that would persist beyond the grave. The title of this story is Murder by a Dead Woman, under the chapter Vengeful Ghosts and Curses in The World's Greatest Ghosts, which I'm now going to be referring to as WGG. The subheading of the story doesn't deserve the airtime, so I'll be omitting it and any other slurs from this discussion. In the 1870s, one Fanchon Moncaire was having the time of her supposedly 6-year-old life. Sailing back and forth on the transatlantic route between France and New York, she was chaperoned by Ada Danforth, who said she was Fanchon's legal guardian until the girl turned 18, whereupon she would receive her inheritance. You see, poor Fanchon, she would explain, is an orphan. Her parents died in a fire. Fanchon was every bit the adorable child, well-mannered, well-liked amongst the other passengers on the ocean liners she played around on. She always carried her china doll, much like any other little girl of the time might, and in this way she fooled everyone. When she and Ada were alone in their stateroom, the mask would drop, and it would be plain that Fanchon was no sweet, innocent child. She was, in fact, a coldly calculating woman of 43 years of age, whose real name was Estelle Ridley, who used coarse language, schemed, and plotted thefts of jewellery from her fellow passengers. She was a person with dwarfism, and had previously been part of a circus before her current pursuits were her sole focus. Her china doll, the one she carried everywhere with her, was where the stolen jewellery would be hidden. No one would think to question a child carrying a doll, would they? And if you love a good historical mystery debunking, make sure to hit that like button so I know to keep these coming. So Fanchon and Ada had a partnership in crime where Ada managed the luggage and Estelle paraded as Fanchon, the child without a care who always took her doll with her everywhere. They would arrive in New York and make for Chinatown, their base of operations. WGG says an old Chinese man assisted them there, though he is only ever mentioned once in the story. In a back room, the doll was emptied out onto a table so that the jewellery Estelle had stolen was on display. It was said to be the harvest of several months' larceny on the continent, and I'll add that continent is Europe in case anyone was wondering. WGG reckons this could have been the modus operandi for some years if Estelle hadn't entered into a deadly feud with a beautiful rival. Ugh. Now, for some everyday sexism and one of the most tedious tropes in stories. Estelle takes a fancy to a man, Dartney Crawley, but another woman, Magda Hamilton, has a thing for him too, and lo, a feud ensues. Because of course it would. In other tellings of the story I'll talk about a bit later on, Magda is also a thief, and she and Estelle plot a heist which Ada wants no part of, but essentially this would be two capable women doing something for themselves with no man involved. But in WGG's telling, Magda just fancies Crawley and has no role working with Estelle. This adds nothing but everyday sexism, and I just don't like it. WGG states Magda then sells out Estelle to the police, so although WGG doesn't have her taking part or plotting crimes with Estelle, she must have somehow known Estelle was a master jewel thief? In which case, how would she know? And is Magda just to be portrayed as a petty woman for why? It just doesn't hold water. Also, about Crawley, the guy they both like. He's said to be a gambler, and although today we would see this as an addiction, back in the Victorian era, I wouldn't have thought him a great catch for a woman, let alone one so keen on enriching herself. So clearly the master jewel thief who thinks up great plans and does well for herself is undone by a gambler and another woman who does what? Again, WGG does not say what Magda does. It's just the kind of bland sexist stereotype that belittles women of all stripes. So then Estelle is arrested by the New York police the next time she docks, and this time her doll is inspected, and she and Ada are swiftly escorted to the Manhattan Detention Complex, or the Tombs to give it its nickname. When the case was tried, Estelle got life and Ada received 20 years. During the sentencing, Estelle saw Magda in the courtroom and she jumped up and announced she would one day kill her betrayer. WGG then goes on to say Magda triumphantly married Crawley, but he then leaves her after 6 months to go prospecting in California. Joy. What a guy. What a catch. Who'd have thought it? The divorce settlement is sizable, however, so Magda's happy with that, and she invests wisely, and that pays off in due course, allowing her to be part of New York's Cafe Society. I didn't think the Cafe Society as a scene happened full on until around the 1920s or so, but I did read in passing the late 1800s had something going on of that nature, so perhaps it was like a proto-scene of sorts. Anyway, an indeterminate amount of time passes. One night, Magda awoke to find Estelle in her bedroom, complete with her porcelain doll, dressed as the child she had pretended to be, yet now withered and old. Magda had run into her bathroom screaming, locking herself in and spending the rest of the night in there in fear. The next day, Magda had barged into a police station, it's unclear which one. Angry they had not informed her Estelle had escaped from prison. Magda demanded the police provide protection for her until Estelle was recaptured. A sergeant in the office then showed her a copy of the New York Sun and the report detailing Estelle had hung herself in her prison cell and subsequently died. Magda immediately books passage on a Cunard liner out of New York, heading for Europe, but I wish I had a date for this because up until 1903 Cunard didn't operate a European-bound route. Their liners used Liverpool, England and Queenstown, which has been known as Cove since 1920, Ireland. Whilst yes, England and Ireland are on the European continent, the authors of WGG are never shying away from mentioning England in as many stories as possible in this book. So why is this the one time they don't mention it? Pop your guess in the comments. I'll come back to why I think this is shortly. And this is where we're going to diverge into a different source temporarily. Stay with me. Possibly the base source, the oldest telling of the tale, actually comes from Ripley's Believe It or Not. Admittedly not by the original Ripley, though correct me if I'm wrong about that in the comments. However, a 1971 comic of Ripley's Believe It or Not True Ghost Stories tells the tale of Estelle Ridley, though several of the details are different. Remember how I said in some tellings Magda is also a thief who joins in with Estelle's schemes? This would be where that's from. In the first panel of the cartoon, it clearly states that it's 1925, and that's 40 years after the end of Magda and Estelle's story. Being a Ripley's, it too attempts to suggest this story is real, that the police have files on it, but I have never found any of the characters in the story in any historical records of note. They only crop up in stories post this comic strip of 1971. And here's where it gets really ridiculous. Joy of joys, I have found my new old favourite. The Weekly World News has a version of this by my new old favourite, loosely termed journalist, Rob Robbins. I swear that name is not real. It's just an allusion to stealing nonsense and perpetuating it. But if you've caught my other videos regarding tales from WGG, you'll know that I have a theory WGG's authors had a subscription to the glorious misinformation hellhole that is the Weekly World News. And this theory isn't letting me down, because just as I have recounted the tales so far more or less as WGG had, WGG's retelling is just Weekly World News' drivel using a thesaurus. The foreword to WGG claims that they're telling this stuff in a straightforward and factual manner, unusual amongst books on this subject, but how can it be if you're just more or less copying from a known tall tale seller? What are the facts anyway? All I can say is anyone who thinks alternative facts are just a relatively recent invention, I've got a bridge I can sell you. So what happened to Magda Hamilton after she made her complaints to the police and demanded protection from Estelle? Back to see how horribly WGG decides this ends. So yes, she was booked on a Cunard crossing, which, if we go by Ripley's dates, would be circa 1885, and a liner from New York to Europe wouldn't actually be with Cunard. For someone that hasn't just had a headache-inducing trip down the transatlantic liners from 1870 to 1905 lane, this might be somewhere they'd trip up, but I've got that headache, and I can tell you I think the authors picked an English-speaking company for perhaps reasons of linguistic or cultural bias. There were other companies running from Germany, France, Belgium, for example, amongst other places, but these are not English as a first language countries. Though I'm happy to entertain other possibilities. Also, I can promise I'll be having more to say about Cunard and White Star Line in a few videos' time, so subscribe if historical ocean liners with paranormal happenings are your jam. You know, for all that talk about whether or not Magda would catch a particular flavour of ocean liner, she never even made it out of her house. Despite being all packed up and having had a goodbye dinner, she was found dead on her bed. Fair warning, it's getting a little graphic here, being that this is now a murder scene. WGG says Magda was found half naked with protruding eyes and blood was dried around her mouth. The medical examiner announced Magda died from drowning in her own blood. There was apparent penetrating force trauma in the throat. Police were unable to locate a murder weapon, but did happen to find several hairs in Magda's mouth, and as WGG would have it, the hairs were similar to those found on the head of a child china doll. I say as WGG would have it, but honestly, at this point, it's what Rob Robbins from Weekly World News would have. Well, it's a chilling ending if it were true. But as we've discussed along the way, when I started digging into the records, the whole thing began to fall apart. Believe me, I wanted to enjoy this tale, but the more I looked into it, the more disappointing I found it. I'm stating now I didn't find anything to back up any claims of it being real. The case has had other paranormal writers and researchers scratching their collective heads for the most part. The debate on whether it actually happened is still in the air, although I'd like to think if it was real, the true crime podcasters would be also weighing in with their takes, and it would be much more well known due to the unusual nature of Magda's murder. Although now I have more questions. Why do these journalists want to talk about a person with dwarfism in this way? I haven't delved into this too deeply because I don't feel too well placed to discuss it. But I did find myself wondering if films like Todd Browning's 1932 Freaks had some part in the thinking behind this tale. Also, why do these male journalists want to talk about women like this? And why don't they fact-check their Cunard liner routes? I know I'm sure my researching that will be important elsewhere at some point. Why do they have to keep making things up about ghosts? And possibly my most unsettling question, if this was a real case and Magda was murdered, who exacted vengeance on behalf of Estelle Ridley and got away with it? Let me know what you think about this. Do you have anything to add? For instance, a source older than the Ripley's Believe It or Not comic. I'd really love to hear about it. If so, leave a comment below with what you know. I don't mind saying I really want to have a proper story, or at least one with real people I can find records of. And in my next video, I'll be doing exactly that. The next tale in WGG is called The Mummy's Hand, and finally, thankfully, it involves very real people I can fact check. Honestly, I am rather excited. Put a like on the video if you liked it, and subscribe if you're not already so you don't miss out on The Mummy's Hand. Bye for now.